All right. Well, it's Friday. We're going to take today, instead of talking about any more battles, we'll get into plenty more. Believe me, we've got lots of battles to talk about. But let's take today and look at the two most important people on each side of the Civil War. It's hard to say they're the most important, but probably the most famous people. Let's put it that way. You've got the United States on this side. And so the president, obviously, is Abraham Lincoln. There's obviously before he grew his beard, looks a little different, doesn't he? And then the main general of the United States Army is Ulysses S. Grant. His nickname was U.S. Grant. He's going to become a president later on. In the South, we've got these two guys. Here is the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. Kind of looks like Abraham Lincoln just a bit, doesn't he? And then you've got their leader, General Lee, Robert E. Lee, a famous military leader as well. So let's just read page 176 and 177 together to learn more a little bit about these famous people of the war. And watch a video also after this and let you learn some more about them. Okay, so pay close attention. Follow along with me as we read in your book. There will be a little 5-question quiz again to make sure you listened. All right. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky, but his family moved to Indiana when he was 7 years old. Lincoln had less than 1 year of classroom education, but he was very bright. He read and studied whenever he could. Lincoln became interested in politics and decided to run for a position in the Illinois state government. After losing his first election, he ran again. This time he won. He was reelected 4 times. Lincoln became well known in Illinois. He often spoke out about slavery. He served 1 term as a U.S. congressman and then worked as a U.S. lawyer for the next 10 years. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. Lincoln always believed that it was illegal for states to secede. He wanted to end the Civil War quickly and restore unity with the southern states. Sadly, he was killed just 5 days after the end of the war. We'll learn more about that later. It's pretty sad. Many people believe Abraham Lincoln did more for America than anyone in history. He's remembered as the man who dedicated his life to mending a broken country. That's why we know so much about him, why he's considered one of the greatest presidents ever. His general of his army was this guy right here, Ulysses Simpson Grant, or U.S. Grant. The Union went through several army leaders during the war, that is, until General Ulysses S. Grant captured northern attention. Hiram Ulysses Grant was born in Ohio and entered West Point 10 years after Robert E. Lee graduated. He's the Southern General, Robert E. Lee. When a clerk incorrectly wrote down his name as Ulysses Simpson Grant, he lived with a mistake rather than complain. Grant also fought in the Mexican War. Grant rejoined the military once the Civil War broke out. His rise to command the Union armies was slow, but eventually he took command of the entire army. As a commander, Grant gained the reputation, some would say unfairly, of being cold and heartless with his troops, seeming too ready to sacrifice thousands of lives to win a battle. Despite their differences, Grant and Lee, General Lee, had one important feature in common: the way their troops admired them. Grant was also famously calm and clear-headed in the middle of a battle. After the war, Grant was elected president in 1869. He died in New York State in 1885, just 1 week after finishing his memoirs, or papers he wrote about his life. How about this guy, the President of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis? Jefferson Davis, the first and only President of the Confederate States of America, was born in Kentucky. He attended the U.S. Military Academy and served in the Army for 7 years. For the next 10 years, Davis lived in Mississippi and worked as a planter. After the Mexican War, he became a U.S. Senator. He strongly supported slavery. Eventually, he became the main spokesman for the entire South. He did not want the South to leave the Union, but he wanted the national government to have less power. When Mississippi seceded, Davis left the Senate. That same year, he was elected by Confederates to serve as their president. But Davis's dedication was not enough to win the war. He could not raise enough money for supplies. He could not convince other countries to recognize the Confederacy as a separate country. He could not get state and local leaders to support his decision. At the end of the war, Union soldiers captured Davis and charged him with treason. He spent 2 years in prison. Finally, the U.S. government dropped the charges and Jefferson was released. Jefferson Davis spent his last years at Beauvoir, his home in Biloxi, Mississippi. And then the last one here, Robert E. Lee. As the first Southern states began to secede, officers began picking sides as to which army they would fight for. Because of his talent and fame, all eyes were on one military officer, Robert E. Lee. Lee was a Virginian, had attended military school at West Point in New York State, and had fought in the Mexican War. President Lincoln offered Lee command of the entire Union Army 4 days after the Battle of Fort Sumter. But his home state had seceded the day before. In the end, Lee could not turn against Virginia. He became the leader of the Army of Virginia. He was soon given command of all the Confederate armies. So think about that. President Lincoln said, General Lee, we want you to command all of the Union armies. And he said, nope, I'm going to stick with Virginia. And he became the commander of the opposite team, the South, the Confederates. During the war, Lee became a strong leader for the Southern people to believe in, cheer for, and support. He was known for making very risky moves on the battlefield, often against superior numbers, and still pulling out a complete victory. Lee was also famous for his personality. He was a noble leader who commanded the respect of both his enemies and his soldiers. After the war, Lee became president of a college in Virginia, which is known today as Washington and Lee University. He died in 1870 in Lexington, Virginia. So here are four of the most famous, they're not maybe the most famous, but four of the most famous people from the Civil War era that we're studying. So you know a little bit more about him now. Two men who had served in politics, two men who were, and Jefferson Davis said was also in the Army, and two men who had gone to West Point and learned to be military leaders, now helping their side fight the Union and the Confederacy. All right. Well, I hope you've had a good week learning about the Civil War. We've got so much more to learn, so many interesting things to talk about in the weeks to come. So I want you to finish your quiz today, watch the video that I'm going to post about these guys, and then you could begin your weekend. Hope you have a great one.